we're going to be looking at frame and frame distance, and it really arises out of the Rolling Roll project itself. Yes, we have this frame chart, which you may well be familiar with. It's there were different versions of it. I think this is quite an early version where you can see these are the frame distance charts. So starting with the frame of participant, I'm in the event. Guide, I show you how it was. Here it's called demonstrator. She later called this agent. I reenact so you can understand. Authority, I am responsible because. Recorder, I'm interested in the event because it occurred. Reporter, I can tell you of the event. Researcher, I need to know of the event. Critic, I interpret the event for you as an event. Artist, I transform the event. So what is this all about? And when we were recently looking at Rolling Roll materials, I came across a chart that some of Dorothy's students had used in a Rolling Roll project. You can see at the bottom this chart. So you have the material that's being used, the class, the frame distance, and the frame, the tasks and the outcome, and how it's passed on then in Rolling Roll to another group. And I thought it would be good if, because we're publishing materials that different partners in the project are doing, I thought it'd be good if we used this chart. We were all using the same chart. So this can go on the website and people can follow. They can see there's a model that we're using and they can follow how we're working. But then there's this question of the difference between frame and frame distance. And they are kind of overlapping. It could seem confusing. I know the team in Porto were trying to do one of these charts.
Difference between frame and distance.
We're getting an echo somewhere. Okay. So the Porto team were looking at this and trying to fill it in, and there was a certain confusion to begin with, I think. They cleared it up. There was a confusion between what's the difference then between frame and frame distance. Frame is really the role that the young people take. And I thought, well, maybe because there could possibly be some confusion here, maybe we should change that word to role. But Dorothy didn't call it role. She avoided, I think, calling it role, probably because it had connotations of acting a role in the theatre. And it's not what she means. So when she talks about frame, she had that quote that she used a lot, or rather it's a misquote of Dylan Thomas, where she said, the undertaker measures with his eyes the passers-by for shrouds. So whatever your job is, it gives you a point of view. And if you're an undertaker, you're looking at people all the time and thinking about what kind of coffin they would need, what size coffin. That's just part of the way you look at the world. It's through a window or through a frame. So there's a reason why she calls it frame, point of view, rather than a role as such. So frame distance, but then you're talking about this business of agent or critic or recorder and so on. So within the role, there is a particular position that is being taken up towards the task that's being done. So this is Lisa's a chart that she's been working on. So the frame is logistics, a logistics team, and the frame distance, the position that they have in relation to the event is, Lisa's put it down as an agent. Lisa, do you want to talk us through this chart and what the project is that you're doing? So I can see you've got the three domains at the top, the art domain, the humanities and the science domain, and the point of change.
Yeah, so it's myself and Richard and Yona. we're all working together on this rolling roll, and there are 2 more teachers in school, and we have the point of change as a needle making factory, because that's all linked to our location, our local history. And the children are enrolled as people who work in a biscuit making factory, and they're looking for a new location for a new factory because their company's doing so well. That's the sort of the story behind it. And the needle making factory, the point of change, has been abandoned for about 50, 60 years. It's been left, and now it's for sale. And we're, as the biscuit making company, we're interested in buying this factory, but if anyone who buys it has to honour the history of the building and continue the legacy of the founder of the needle making company. So we sort of started, didn't we, Richard, in talking about the excuse me, the biscuit making team. So where the children were enrolled as the biscuit team, and building up this idea that the company was doing really well. It's got 2 factories, one in the northwest of England and one in the northeast of England, and one in the southwest of England, and they're looking for a place to build their new factory that's going to make it easier for them to just distribute their biscuits, that kind of thing. So that was sort of the geography side of things. Yeah, is that okay for now, David?
Yeah, and you talked about the chart yourself, didn't you? And that you were not quite clear sometimes what the frame distance was, which is
yes.
We've had this. Had this meeting today. Yeah.
So we find that because we work with Mantle of the Expert, usually we're fine with like what materials are we going to use, what are the tasks and the outcomes, and where will the drama be, where will the tensions be. We feel pretty comfortable and pretty happy with that, although obviously we're always still learning and helping each other. But in Mantle of the Expert, the children would stay as the biscuit making company, and we'd take on other points of view, but we would never really consider frame distance. And so we're finding that tricky to get our heads around. So we've looked at the charts and the other documents that describe frame distance, and we can make sense of those, and with Dorothy's examples, but we're finding it really tricky to apply it to our own work. That's where we're stuck, really. So participant seems fine, because if the children are participants, that's easy to identify. And maybe the other end of frame distance is easy. It's the ones in the middle that we're finding difficult to apply. Would you say, Richard and Yona?
Yeah. Hello, Tara. Thank you for joining us. I don't know if you can hear us yet. But yeah, just to clarify that frame distance is something that is not simply for rolling roll. It is something that she applied within Mantle as well. And I guess within commission model as a way of thinking in terms of, so what is the position that they are taking towards the commission that they've got? So it's a way of seeing, a way of thinking, and a way of talking, and a way of knowing, I think, is what she's talking about. So it's different ways. These different frame distances give you different ways of knowing, she would say. You've got your frame, you've got your role, but within that, you've got a particular position in relation to the event or the task. So within her example, one example was the Good Samaritan. She often used the Good Samaritan story to explain this idea of frame distance. So one of her ideas was that the children would be in the frame of shepherds who were on the hill, looking down on the road where this incident took place, the attack on the Good Samaritan. And they would then, having witnessed this event, they would then have to explain it to other people. Her idea was that they would explain it to their wives or an older shepherd. They would have to become, then, they would be the guides to the event. They'd see it and they would explain it to other people. So their position, with that task at least, was as guides. So in the there's a video, Making Drama Work video, which she did with Ian Draper, where she goes through Good Samaritan story, always using the Good Samaritan story and giving examples of, okay, if you made the children guides, they could be in this role. If you made them agents, they could be in this role. And so I'm going to go through what she did. I'm also going to post that whole video on YouTube so you can watch all of it. So in any of these frame distances, I'd say there's an event, at least in the examples, the main examples that she used, and I'm going to draw on two of them. One is the Good Samaritan story, and one is Air Canada plane crash. And that's in the Mantle of the Expert book. In each of these examples, there's an event that happens, a big event, a dramatic event, an extreme event. So Good Samaritan, it's the attack on the Good Samaritan. So there's an event that needs to be closely scrutinized and understood. And it also involves, it's an event that involves some kind of terrible dilemma. Now, a way has to be found to evoke that event for the young people. They haven't participated in it, but we're asking them to think of themselves as having witnessed it in some way, or certainly heard about it in some way. So there needs to be a convention used that gives the idea of that event, helps to evoke it in their minds as if they have seen it or witnessed it. There needs to be a reason for them to understand the event and an awareness of the audience that they're going to communicate with, be it as guides or agents or authority or whatever. And they will then have a responsibility to bear witness to that event, to scrutinize it, to come to know it, and to pass on the understanding that they have to an audience. But they don't simply have like a cold, neutral position, which you could say if they were simply like academic researchers or critics or whatever. It sounds like it's a kind of cold relation to the event, an intellectual relation to the event, but they in fact have, from the examples, they have an emotional relationship to the event. And they also have to be built into role in the usual way that we think of them being built into a position, into a role. So what I think she was doing, one of the things she was doing with this idea of frame distance, was moving away from the idea of direct participation in an event. So Good Samaritan story, she didn't want them to act out the story. Air Canada plane crash, she didn't want them to act out a plane crash. They wouldn't be participants in that sense. But she did really want them to get close to the experience of really seeing and understanding and getting close to the evil of the event in the Good Samaritan, the trauma of the event in the plane crash, to get close to understanding that, which she didn't feel they would do if they tried to act it out. They wouldn't be able to act it out credibly or with truthfulness because it's too far from their experience, or they play at it and so on. So it is about, she said that you could get really to the heart of the Good Samaritan story by having them as artists designing a mural for a hotel that was called the Good Samaritan. So it's one of those paradoxes in Dorothy's work where it seems like she's taking them away from something, but it's indirect. She's going indirect. She's going away from it only to come right back close to the heart of it. so she wants them to feel, I think, a responsibility for witnessing this event, for telling about it, even though they were not involved or they weren't directly affected by it in the immediate event. So if anybody wants to chip in at any time, questions, comments, please do. So one of the things that I think this idea of frame distance does is it slows down time. And one of the things about any kind of drama where they are the participants, one of her concerns was that children tend to want to rush towards the end in acting out any kind of story like that. And this is really slowing it down and saying, really look at it, really scrutinize it. And by doing that, really getting to the heart of it. So far, any questions so far or comments so far?
I mean, I think she always said, didn't she, that the further away you get from something, you know, the further away you're positioned, when you look at something, the closer you can get to it. She said something like that. It's a kind of contradictory thing, but sometimes looking at something from a distance, you actually get closer to it because you're kind of liberated in a sense. If you get too close, you might not be protected enough to want to look that close or be so close to it, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely.
Just remember everything. You know, this frame distance, you can, so you're shifting, this is what I'm presuming, you're shifting their positions within, for example, in the role of people running the biscuit factory, whatever, you're then shifting their position. You know, we're standing in as if we're reporters, or we're, you know, if someone was going to report on this, or I wonder what they'd say. And so you're looking at it, you're shifting it within their general frame of the biscuit factory runners. Is that right?
One thing you can do, obviously, is you can shift it to take on a different role. Yeah. You can say, let's be reporters now. How would we handle it? But I think you don't necessarily have to do that. You don't necessarily have to be saying to them, we're going to be newspaper reporters now. Hopefully I can make clear with some of the examples that I go through that actually they can stay in the same role, but they can shift in terms by the task makes them shift and look at it differently. And in one moment they might be guides to it, and another moment they might be recorders of it. But that you haven't told them that they're doing a different role. They're still the same role, whatever it is. They might still be logistics people, but they've got it shifts the way they relate to the whole, whatever they're doing, whatever the task is, whatever the focus is. They could become critics of something at a certain point, but you're not saying to them, now you're going to be critics. I think it's a case of when you're setting up, I mean, I'm certainly doing this more now. When I'm setting up the role that they're going to take, I think of what position I want them to have to the whole event. So the main role that they've got, I'm thinking, okay, are they going to be guides here? So it might be that they are people producing a guidebook. This was an example in one of Claire's projects that she did, a roll and roll project, where you had a fresco had been discovered and a group was going to produce a brochure, I think, about it. So they would be guides to that tapestry, but they might also at a certain point in their tasks be critics because they've got to analyze it, haven't they? They've got to really look at it and analyze it and interpret it. And that's what she means by critic. She doesn't mean a newspaper critic. She means someone who's got to interpret something closely. So they could be still in the same frame as people who are maybe a marketing company producing a brochure, but at certain points they are guides to it, and at certain points they are recorders of it or critics of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was just wondering how far these frame distances that you introduce in subtle ways are dependent to a degree on what the children and your young group show an interest in. And it seems to me when you're going through this process, whatever they're running, you realize they're curious about this or they're curious about that. And then you select that frame distance or introduce it in a subtle way
Yeah.
I know you're looking at the curriculum, obviously, but you're also looking at what they show an eagerness and a curiosity about, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, you might well, absolutely.
You know.
Yes. Okay, I'll just go through some of the how she talked it through with the Good Samaritan material. One of the things that I think is it's interesting in these examples, at least, that it's built around a dramatic event in a way that I don't really usually think of Mantle, but here it really is built around a dramatic event that is then being examined. And it's also puts them, they're not direct participants in it, but it puts them in a, it is dramatic. There is a tension in the way that they have to handle this situation. They're immersed in it by having been witnesses to it in some form. And as I say, it's not a cold thing. So, participant, here it is happening to me. So that's an image that she did of the Good Samaritan drama event. So the guide is, I saw the event, I can relive it and show you what happened. I saw, I can tell, I can be your guide to the event. So her example of that, as I said, was this idea of shepherds on the hill above the town. And they look down into the valley and they see this event happening. And she said, well, guides are always full of emotion because they saw it. She introduced this dilemma for them because they didn't just witness the event, they were seen by the thieves who attacked the man. They know, the thieves know that they saw them do this. The thieves actually occupied one of their huts before they undertook this assault on the man. So now the shepherds have a dilemma themselves. They're not just witnessing this event and then telling somebody else about it, going to the police or whatever. They know that they are in a dangerous position now because those thieves could come back and they have to make a decision. Do we tell people about it or do we stay silent? And that really puts them in the dilemma. It's a dilemma that's very close to the Good Samaritan's own. Do they get involved? And they have to explain it. They have to explain it first to, she thought that it could be their wives. She would come in role and say, she would represent their wives and they would explain it to her. Or it could be an elderly shepherd. Again, this is teaching role. They have to be a guide to the event. First of all, of course, you have to find a way to evoke the event so they can imagine what happened. She doesn't explain what convention she used, but that's when your conventions come in. So that's the guide one. And these colors, by the way, there's always a red color on these charts because it's sort of just degrees of closeness or heat, degrees of redness in terms of how close they are to the event through this frame distance. I am the agent, I must help you understand. So her example here was a TV company which is making a documentary about courage. And one of the stories they focus on is a modern version of the Good Samaritan story. So it's a businessman who was mugged some 20 years ago and someone came to their aid. And now this TV company are asked by their producer to come up with this documentary. They interview the businessman who's been in a wheelchair ever since he was mugged. And he has to try to remember what happened in detail all those years ago. Because of course, 20 years, he's not maybe so clear on all the details. So they have an audience in mind as well. The producer of the program who commissions them, the future audience of the TV program, but also I think a responsibility to tell this man's story. They may be going to do a reconstruction of the event, so they need the detail. So there's a certain sort of coolness in the fact that they need this detail. It's part of their responsibility in making a TV program, but at the same time, again, that slows down time because it makes them pay attention to the detail. And then by paying attention to the detail, I think gets them close to the experience, to understanding the experience. So in these examples, it's really a case of she's taking one situation, but she's looking at very different roles that they could do. It's not a case of you would jump from the one to another within a drama. These are separate dramas, really, she's talking about. If you wanted them to be positioned as agent, you might do it this way. You might decide this is the role they're going to take. So then we have authority. Now, I am the authority. I have to make sensible decisions about possible results arising from such events. So in this case, her thinking was she would put the children in the frame of people running a market in the temple at that time. So there would be a whole business of setting up the market. And the children would really be, that would be what they were doing. They're running their market stores. They're selling their doves or whatever. And a rumor spreads around the market about this man having been attacked and about a priest having walked past the man and ignored him. And the high priests want to know who is spreading these rumors about priests. And they have an inquiry into the event and they bring in witnesses. And so you'd have conventions to represent the witnesses. And the children will have to decide if they think the high priests are trying to cover up the truth, or if they want the information so they can make a case for increased security on the road. So there's a focus on the priest's dilemma as well. Her idea was that it would bring them close to this question of, well, okay, what would you do in that situation? And they might then be questioning the priest and finding out from them, why didn't you stop? Had you seen the thieves? And so on. So having set up something that seems detached from the whole story, the market traders, they are drawn into having to follow and understand the event. The recorder, I record the event. I am responsible to those who will ask what really happened. So in this case, the recorder, her example, is a Roman consul who doesn't want a report sent back to Rome that doesn't look good. So the whole thing has to be cleared up because people will say, what really happened?
To it, but I'm not on the thing.
So people will say what really happened. They will need to know what happened. So the frame and role in this case is as Roman guards. The children will be enrolled as Roman guards who were in the inn when the Good Samaritan brought in this injured man. And a row breaks out, an argument breaks out because people are in there saying to the Roman guards, why weren't you out there? Why weren't you guarding the road? Why does this thing start? Why does this thing happen? And so a fight breaks out and these Roman guards are injured. And so then they've got to consider, how do we approach this Roman consul when the soldiers are on charges for being in this fight in the inn? And one of the things about this was she was interested in exploring the life of a Roman soldier at that time in that place. So like the temple, she would build up that world. This again was interesting to me that she's doing this, that she is putting them in a role which is in the past. Because I've tended, when teachers have said to me, can you set Mantle of the Expert in the past? And I've tended to say, well, no, not really. It's difficult, I think, because it's harder for them to get into it. They can look at the event in the past, but be in the present day. But here she is putting them in the past and deliberately wanting to build up the idea of what life was like for people running a market or Roman guards. So again, in this question of what would happen is, again, these Roman soldiers will be brought in closer to having to look at the whole event of the Good Samaritan. So they would, the priest could be called in, witnesses could be called in, the children could stand in as the Samaritan and say what they thought the Samaritan was thinking at that moment. And the idea was that Dorothy said it would end up in a horrendous report, which is not just about the Good Samaritan event, but about the whole situation that they are in. The rivalries, the hatred between different religions and communities. What is the place of the Roman soldiers at that time, in that context? She actually says, who is my enemy is the question that she's focusing on. So again, they're drawn into the dilemma. They are very much sort of have their own drama, really, which is about the fact that they are brought up on charges for having been involved in this fight in the inn. There's actually there's a video of Dorothy working with some master's students at the what became City Birmingham University, and she takes the students through the first stages of this drama, where first of all she's working with them and they are deciding on what injuries they've got and grumbling a bit about the injuries they've got from having been in this fight in the inn. And then they have to report to their superior officer who wants to know what was going on, why his soldiers were involved in a fight. And this is Dorothy in role. So she's really building them into a drama themselves, first of all, and building them into the role of the Roman soldiers. The press. So the press is the story keeper. I wasn't there. I will share with you what I have come to understand. So in this case, the journalists would produce a report to please Rome. And they have to please Rome or it won't be published. And one of the things the children might do, Dorothy suggested, is look at newspapers today to see what kind of style they used and do something that might influence the way they write their reports. And one point in talking about this, the point she makes is, she says, setting this story in the past, they can come in a way that's cleaner to the event, rather than trying to deal with a modern day story. It can catch them off guard. It's this thing again about, we were talking about the distance can actually bring closeness to it. I researched the event, the researcher. I researched the event, and then when you research the event, it's always in the past. I researched the event to throw new light upon it. Now time has passed. So her example is they could be consultants preparing a brochure for a hospice, which wants to project the image that they are caregivers. So they want to use the Good Samaritan story as a theme. So it would be a brochure, but it might also be a radio program, a TV program. So you're not saying to the children, we are going to be researchers. They are consultants, but you know that the job they're going to be doing is, the main focus is as researchers. Critics, I am the critic of such events. I compare this event with others and give you my reasons, opinions, and explanations regarding such events. So her example is people creating a museum of heroes, people who are sort of find themselves unexpectedly behaving in a heroic way in a situation they find themselves in. So in creating this museum, they would look at different stories, perhaps, and create waxwork displays, including one of the Good Samaritan story. And I am the artist. I study the event and move to reinterpret the event to create a new perception. So this example she gives is creating a stained glass window of the Good Samaritan story for a hotel restaurant at the end of the Channel Tunnel, which wants to give an image of hospitality, and also creating plates, creating a logo, and so on. So that's those are her examples in relation to the Good Samaritan story. Any comments or questions about that so far?
David?
Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, go for it.
Go
Go for
ahead.
it. Okay. I was just wondering if, looking at those colours, I am the agent had a redder band at the bottom than I'm the participant. Would I'm the participant not be the most hot?
To be honest, Terry, I might have to check the originals here, because I know that in this image here, it was very faint, and so I've darkened the image a bit to make the picture clearer. So that might have affected the color of it. So I can't really,
Okay, right.
I think, and in any case, once you start scanning things, I mean, you can see some of the colors are different, yeah. But once you start scanning it, you lose some of the actual color quality anyway. So,
But in terms of hotness, I'm the participant would be the most hot because it's the closest.
presumably, yeah. You'd be like burning hot, I suppose, in that one, yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right.
I was just going to say, David, the distance seems to be interpreted by location, like they might be in the market, or in terms of time, like the distance they are away from it in terms of time.
Yeah.
And maybe the distance in terms of their own emotional connection to the event.
I think there's a difference in time, definitely, with some of them, because some of them she's setting now. So
Yeah.
she's taking it, and she's saying, like, with things like the researcher, it's always something that's happened in the past. She's giving them a relationship to the event which might seem like it's not involved in the same location, like the people in the temple or the guards in the inn, but she does want to bring them right to the event, I think, in that case, because she's giving them their own dilemma.
Yeah.
Like the soldiers have got their dilemma because they're in trouble, and she's building on that. She's giving them this emotional involvement to begin with, and then building on that, and they have to get involved in the whole situation of the Good Samaritan. So I think that that's the initial emotion might be different than the final emotion.
I mean, it could be that the further they're away from the actual event, the closer they might be connected emotionally. I don't know, or the more distance from time, you know, because it's more reflective in that sense, and it might emotionally connect them more closely, even though it's a distance away. I'm just thinking it through my head. Just ignore me, it's fine.
The most obvious, the guide one, is they are very definitely right there involved in the event, but they're just not people who take part in the actual event itself. They witness it, but they are right there involved in the consequences of it, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Having to take responsibility for it.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Any other comments, questions at this point? So I thought, for fun, we'd try it. This is a list from 1983, and it's got some examples of different frames. Some of them seem to have come from her students at that time. So you've got, and I thought we might look at this and try and decide if we think they were positioned as agents or recorders or whatever. So number one is students as public relations consultants meeting to develop strategies to enhance the image of maligned archaeologists. So any thoughts on what is that in terms of frame distance?
Press.
Public relations consultants might give us press. Because they're developing newspaper stories.
What about guide? I don't know. Because they're developing strategies to enhance. I don't know. The thought.
They didn't I'd say they didn't witness it.
No. Right.
So I wouldn't have said guides
No.
there.
So from the Malvern team, we say we think researchers.
So they're
getting new light onto something.
Because something has happened to these archaeologists that they are maligned, and so what happened? Yes?
Maybe.
But if they're enhancing it, haven't they got an agenda?
Well, yes, absolutely, Helen. And I think that's a good point, because I think one of these things that we've said, it's not like they are academics are supposed to be neutral and objective. And so some of these roles, some of these frame distances could seem like they're sort of detached. But I think you can absolutely have bias come in there, because if you're working as somebody who's the story keeper, the press, you might well decide that we are people who have got an agenda, have got a bias. we've got to write this story in such a way that the authorities in Rome will accept it, for example. And this one seems close to me to, who said researchers? Was it the Woodrow team said researchers? Well, we have got an example before, haven't we, where they were researchers. Her example was consultants preparing a brochure for a hospice to promote the image of the hospice. So it seems to me like this is close to that one. So I think just on the basis of Dorothy's examples, I think that's a point to the Woodrow team in that.
You got all the right answers there then, David.
You gave them the questions beforehand, I know.
And we have multiple choice.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
That was a complete guess.
I was informed guess, probably.
Okay.
Students framed as assistants to a gallery curator to enable them to look more thoughtfully and directly at a portrait. This would be a role in portrait. So it's set up as a convention. Somebody is sitting there as a in costume, I guess, as a portrait, and they are assistants to the art gallery curator to enable them to look more thoughtfully and directly at a role in a portrait.
Would that be critic?
I think that's a point to Terry team. That is.
Yes.
Good, Terry.
I didn't get the memo in advance.
Because that seems to me, I think critic anyway, because it seems to me that it's about interpreting something. As she says, critic is interpreting something in detail. You're scrutinizing it in detail. This third one, students framed as experts in maritime construction and as TV reporters engaged in a reconstruction of Noah's Ark. I'm not quite sure whether these are two separate things or whether one leads into another, because it's all about maritime construction. Students as experts in maritime construction. I'm not quite clear what they'd be doing exactly. So let's say they're TV reporters and the program is about reconstructing Noah's Ark. The TV documentary. So what were we saying that might be then, do you think?
Going for, so that's like the media, reporters, TV, press.
I'm putting my eggs in the same basket.
Yeah. So they're revealing what context of the world they decide that they should or ought to.
Just to throw a spanner in the works, of course, we've got, yes, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I'm just wondering, because she also had a TV company, didn't she, who were agents, because they were making a documentary about the Good Samaritan story, of focusing on courage. Let me see what note she's got for agent. So the agent, we build a picture of how things were at the time they occurred, and the event is all in the past. Reason prevails and there is tranquility, which may have feeling in it, but need not have. These are different notes that she produced for the whole thing. So I would say, you might say that's agent. Students framed as area experts in a police training college making a film to train cadets how to conduct investigations, including calculations. I think I can see in the background in Yona's picture that Carl is mowing the lawn. Carl's jumped in to mow the lawn and Yona's had to tell him to stop. Anyway, let's focus. What do we think this...
Is Carl a participant?
Yona, Carl had to be stopped from making the lawn, is that right? From mowing the lawn.
He's an artist. He's a lawn mowing artist.
Students framed as area experts in a police training college making a film to train cadets. Is that press, do we think? Or is it artists making a film?
I would have thought, well, I was going to say artists because
Could be.
they're doing two things there really. They're making a film, but they're also...
But they also have to kind of reconstruct investigations, don't they? The minute investigations in detail. So again, that could be agents, I think.
And if they're experts, are they not also authorities?
The authority is someone who decides, who has to make a decision that might involve like changing the law. So it's more of a kind of, would be more of a legal thing like that. Those are the consequences and implications of it. It's tricky, isn't it, when you try to look at it? It's why I sort of think, I start by thinking, what is their position going to be in relation to the event? And then I decide what their role is, rather than trying to look at what their role is and then work out what I think their position is. You see what I mean? Let's just try once more. I think we can decide easily on students framed as film consultants with the task of interpreting a film script and translating it into physical images, storyboards. But I think we can say easily that that is artists. Children framed as villagers of a Bronze Age project. I think that was the kind of thing that would be, it depends on what their actual tasks are, whether they're simply participants who are being observed or whether they're making a record of their own work. Because one of the things that you can say is, okay, just to complicate matters. So you could say, okay, we're going to look at this. This is what the work is. This is what the focus is. And we want to position them as a team of journalists who are investigating it and preparing a report. That's what we want the role to be. But you can also have, they can be in one role. So they might be engineers, for example, and depending on the task, the frame distance can shift. So an example I like, which is the Air Canada plane crash drama. So the children wanted to do a plane crash. And she immediately saw that that might involve them just sort of waving their arms around and getting excited and just playing at the idea of a plane crash. And she knew she wasn't going to go with that. She wasn't going to take that. But there's a dramatic event at the heart of it, which is the plane crash. And there was a convention. They had to first of all witness this event. So there's a convention. And the convention that they came up with was they were engineers in a remote part of Alaska, or near Alaska, northern Canada. And they were testing equipment in cold conditions and extreme conditions to see how it worked. And so they all had tasks of testing things like washing machines. And they decided that they would hear about this plane crash because one of the pieces of equipment they were working on, a radio or something, would pick up the final messages, the final sounds from the plane before it went down. And so they had, Dorothy created a recording herself of that. And then it was a normal routine day. They were going about their business, testing things. And at a certain point, she played this recording. And then they had to sort of, within the drama, it was a case, what did we hear? What was that? What happened there? So there was a convention to represent the plane crash and to evoke the idea of the plane going down. And then they had to report on what they knew to Air Canada. So at that point, they're guides. But then they're the only people in the area because it's a very isolated place they're living. So they have to get on their helicopter and they have to go over the crash site. Now, what she did was she had one long piece of paper and they drew on it the trees in the area and the trees, how they had been damaged by the plane crash. And they started to add bits of the plane. And then in the helicopter, they were standing there like this with as if they had binoculars looking down at the site of the plane crash. And they became recorders because they had to make a minute record of what they saw and where everything was. So she hadn't said to them, now you're recorders. They are still engineers. As far as they're concerned, they're engineers, but their position in relationship to the event has shifted. The task now asks them to be recorders, making a minute record of the whole thing, rather than guides at that point explaining it to someone else. So, and again, that's an example, I think, of what I'm saying about slowing down time. Just the act of, well, if they did a plane crash, it would all be over in a few seconds with some screens, some shouting and some waving around and falling to the ground. But she wants them to really scrutinize it. So this thing about looking and making a note and record of what they see, they were going over this crash site over and over again and making this minute record. So it was really slowing things down and making them scrutinize it. So I think, as I see it, I think now in terms of, okay, what's the frame distance going to be to the job that they've got? And so then what is the role going to be? But also within, having chosen they're going to be members of the press, within that, at certain points, their relation to the task might shift. Again, as I say, you don't necessarily then have to say, okay, now we're going to be critics, now we're going to be newspaper critics, now we're going to be guides or writing a guidebook or whatever. It's just that the relationship to the task shifts at that moment and they stay in the same role. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question there, David?
Yes.
So in your classroom, so you have, we said 25 students. So it's a kind of a collective role as, we say, the recorders, the engineers making the minute details. I'm just thinking of classroom management from where I come from. Would you have 2 groups in the class or the whole class? Could you be more efficient, thinking classroom management wise now, to have 2 groups or three different frames in the classroom to assign tasks to them, so that by the end of the lesson or the second lesson, you would have a composite picture of the Air Canada crash? It's a classroom management question.
I think you might have them doing, would they be doing different tasks, Helen, or not?
They would, yeah, they would. Yeah.
You could divide it like that. Do you think that would be easier or harder in terms of classroom management?
I would say it would be, I know you said about slowing down, but maybe it might speed up. So if a teacher was going to do maybe a body of work based on Air Canada, that if they were divided into groups, that it would be more productive.
Well, yeah, and you could divide them up. It would be your choice.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it might be that you prefer to keep them within one frame and one task, because it's easier. Maybe I would have thought. I feel that it's easier to keep them have a group identity and a group focus. So because otherwise you're split as a teacher and you're split as a group. So I would keep them all as recorders together at once, doing the same with the same focus. But that's me, Helen. You could absolutely keep them up in a different way. Lisa, and can I put you on the spot, Lisa? Because I know that you're saying does that bring any light, or does that bring more confusion, what I've just been through?
Well, what I would say is not to get hung up on the actual labels, but know that they are there as a source to look at what you're actually doing with the children. Otherwise, you're going to get hung up on, oh my God, am I an agent? Am I a critic? Am I a shaman? And the other thing to consider is that in the mantle pack that Tim and Luke put together some time ago, the descriptions of the frame distance are different from the ones that we've been looking at today as well. Not much, but there's enough of a difference as well, which is the wonderful world of Dorothy, I think. So I just don't think we should get ourselves too wound up by it all.
I think we may be able to distinguish between those first 2 on the list. So participant observer, yeah, I think that they're easy to identify. Researcher and artist, the other end of the scale, yeah, easy. Media is okay. It's those ones in the middle. I still feel that they're, yeah, I'm not really that clear on them. So maybe I've just got to struggle with it for a bit longer. And the other thing we were sort of briefly discussing whilst listening at the same time was maybe sometimes we've just got a task that we want to do. And maybe I'm trying to put a frame distance on a task that doesn't need a frame distance on it. It's almost like a task to get us going for the day. And then the frame distance becomes more obvious as we move into something else. So maybe I'm trying to attach a label to something that doesn't need one. I'm not sure.
Maybe, and maybe we can look at some of the examples shortly of that you're offering the group, weren't you, to try and help decide what the frame distance might be in these cases. So maybe we can have a look at that in a minute. Shall we go to one of your charts and see if we can help sort this out, or try and look at what the frame distance might be?
Yes, please.
Do you want me to bring it up, or do you want to share one of them yourself?
Oh, I haven't got it ready, David. We could have a look at, have you got the one that says history on it? Because that's what Yona's working with us on. Okay,
let me have a look. I'll try and find the one you're talking about. So maybe you can just, what have they done so far in terms of the mantle, the project, the rolling roll?
Yeah, so we have looked at the sort of geography type domain with, that's Richard and I, isn't it? Looking at the location, possible locations of the new factory. But then we had, we looked at an advert that said that there's an abandoned factory for sale, and that whoever buys it would need to honour the history of the building and continue the legacy of the founder. So that's taken us into starting to look at this factory then and the history of it, and that's where Yona's been working with us. So as the biscuit company, we needed to start to find out some more information about this place. So when the advert says to honour the history of the building, well, what is the history? And when it says to continue the legacy of the founder, well, and it does give a name, William Avery. Well, what is his legacy? Do we want to even go any further in exploring this building with the potential to buy it or not? So that's where we were up to. Then this is where I was wondering whether some tasks might not need labelling, because we started off, so Yona was with us on Tuesday, weren't you, Yona?
Yeah, I was.
And she started off in my class with me, and we had rolled on from the class next door a partially completed floor plan of the factory, the needle making factory. And we'd already started to look at, well, what was involved in the needle making process. And we had some drawings and we had some text. And so when Yona came to us, we were trying to use what we'd found out from this to label some of the rooms in the floor plan of the factory to see, is this the kind of building that we want? And then that was really interesting, actually, because I thought of it as just a task to kick us off for the afternoon, but it threw up lots of questions from the children about the whole process of needle making and how the factory might have been laid out. So how big were certain rooms? Did they need to be next door to each other? There was a specific job called pointing, which would throw up quite a lot of dust and debris. And did that room need to have access to outside windows so that the people could breathe? And it threw up lots and lots of questions. But we paused them because we're actually going to go to a museum next week, and I thought we could take the questions with us. So instead, we decided to step into some of these roles of people who worked in the factory. So what might it have been like to work for this person, for William Avery? knowing all that we know so far. So the children stepped into role as people who were working in the needle making factory, and William Avery came along with his brother, walking through the factory, and was just talking to the workers. How are you? How's your little boy? Is he better now? That kind of thing. We're trying to build up a picture of this boss of the needle making factory. And we didn't quite get to this point, but we're trying to put forward a point of view that maybe this job was forced upon him as the elder of 3 brothers in a family, and that he had other interests, and really maybe he didn't want to be under all the pressure of running this factory. Meanwhile, I hope this isn't too complicated, but in the parallel class next door, they were exploring the workers' points of view, and they were looking at accidents that could have happened in the factory, and was the boss actually paying enough attention to them. That's the sort of general sort of story. So we're trying to create sort of 2 viewpoints linked to the needle making factory, with the owner and with the workers, with a point of view of, do we, as the biscuit making company, do we want to buy this factory? Can we honor the history? Can we continue the legacy of the person? So that's where we're heading. We had other tasks, like we looked at a census, real life census from the area from 1861, and we started to create a pictorial representation of the people who lived in that area, who worked in the needle making industry. And we've rolled on the census to the class next door so that they can add on they're going to put names to these people, and they're going to mark on whether they've been injured or whether they were killed in the factory with accident reports. So they're going to roll those back to my class. So we're trying to sort of build up a point of view of what it was like to work in the factory, and for William Avery, and what kind of boss he was. So all of that's going on with the general sort of frame of the biscuit company looking for a new factory, and whether we think this is the right factory, and whether we can do what the current owners want to do. But in our plan, we don't have any frame distance labels attached to any of these things. Yeah, would you say that's a summary, Yona?
Yeah, I think so. And I think when I've listened to what David said today and what everyone said about frame distance, it seemed like when we were doing that, how you set them that task, when they were looking at the plans, they were looking at photographs, they were really interrogating what it was like in the past. They were saying, would the rooms be next to each other? And then one child said, well, they do this in order. So I would imagine the rooms would be in order according to the tasks, and they were just getting all so engaged in uncovering that. And it seemed like they were like historians, if you like, at that time. I mean, one child said to me, is history true? It's kind of, you think it's true, but it might not be true. Is it what we just make up? I mean, and it was like that whole thing. I'm thinking he's looking at this like a historian, because you only base it on evidence, and you have to imply things that might have been, really, because who knows the truth? And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing he raised, really. So I think when they were in that situation of interrogating all the material and stuff, and talking about, having the air from outside and what happens in the pointing room, and then they looked at the WC, and they said, and this one child said, well, if you'd gone back to the Middle Ages, they'd have had a great big hole in the ground, and they'd have all shared it. They wouldn't have had a flush toilet. And did they have a flush toilet in Victorian land? So they were really getting into the history of it. So I think there was a frame distance in that respect, because while they were engaged in that task, they weren't too worried about the biscuit factory at the time.
No.
Because they got totally engrossed in that. And it's what Dorothy says, it's not what I want them to learn, it's the task I set them in order for them to learn what I want them to learn. And that seemed to be illustrated very neatly in that example, to be honest. So I think there was a frame distance, even though we didn't say it was.
Which one do you think, Yona? Which one?
Well, I think historian researchers, I guess.
They could be researchers, or you could say they're recorders, because it sounds to me like they're looking at these rooms and they're saying exactly what happened.
Yes.
part of the room. They've got to
Yes.
make a record of that because they've got to know.
That's right. Yes,
Because
that's right.
It's like the Air Canada thing, or if you can imagine, like the people in the frame of marine archaeologists who are looking at the Titanic wreck, they would be making a minute record of what was
That's right.
wrecked. I think that's exactly what you're doing here. It's that kind of building up that minute record. We are recorders, so we have to record it exactly as it should be.
Yes.
I mean, like
that's what was happening, really. You know,
distance is leaping out in lots of these tasks, actually. And that it's at that moment they are, whatever the role is, it's the same, but that is the position that they've got towards the whole task. Record it minutely. So shall I bring this up and we'll have a look and see if I've got the right thing first of all. Is this the one? Is this one you mean? Can you see it?
Yeah, so it starts at the bottom and then there should be another one after that, David, I think.
Yeah, so shall we just look at this one first and carry on? Yeah, so it's
thought,
domain.
Yeah, the history domain, so yeah.
So start with the for sale sign on the Ashley Works building. So this is the building that's being taken over.
Yes.
The advert says the current owners will sell to someone who will preserve the history of the building and honour the legacy of the head of the family, William Avery. 4B already looked at the history of needle making. We'll make a summary to roll on to 4A. Okay, so what you've got here, you've got a blank floor map of a local needle making factory.
Yeah.
So this is the task that you said they did. They used room names to add labels to the plan and match historical pictures to the rooms. So they came up in the end with an annotated map.
Yeah.
That is going to be rolled on to 4A.
Yeah.
So are they in a fictional dramatic frame? Are they in a role or not at this point? Or are they just...
So at this point, they're the biscuit making company who have seen this advert. They're looking for the new factory. They've seen this advert, so they feel like this building is a potential building. So they're trying to find out before they speak to the people who are selling the building. They want to find out a bit more about the history because it says that they will sell to someone who will preserve the history.
So absolutely. So they're not within this company. You're saying they are the company. They haven't got a particular department within the company. They are simply the company. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So it seems to me that I would call that recording. They're just thinking about the task, what they're doing. I would call it recorder. You could make a case for researcher, but I think it's that detail of recording something that is what they're doing. They're looking at pictures, they're matching it to the room names, they're making this. We've got to make an accurate historical recreation and account of that.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would have initially thought the same as Yona, researcher, but when you're saying about making an accurate historical record, I can see why you would say recorder.
Somebody is saying to them, we need an accurate record of what was here if we're going to preserve the history. Presumably that's the logic of it, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think so, yeah.
And I suppose the fact that they have to honour the life of the original founder and honour what's been there before, that's the motivating factor for them to record, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that's the thing. It's with these things, you're saying they need to do this because this is how they're framed. This is what they've been asked to do. And, you know.
Lisa, what's the next one that you want to look at, the next page in this?
Yeah, it's not that one. It starts with annotated plan with pictures.
That one, okay.
That one, yeah. So I'm now guessing and thinking, okay, so these next tasks here are all part of this recorder frame distance, because all the next tasks there where we're adding in photos and things is all part of building up the picture of the history of the building and this accurate record. Yeah. So I would probably say most of those are, until we get down to, is it on here on the screen? The bottom, yeah.
Okay.
Take on roles of workers from the 1861 census. That then became something very different then in the class. So that's when we took everything that we'd looked at so far, and the children took on roles of these workers from the census, in trying to find out now, okay, so we're building up a picture of the history of the building. We also need to know about the legacy of William Avery.
So when they go into taking on the roles of workers,
Yeah.
are they shifting in the whole frame, the whole role? Are they taking on a different role, or are they still the modern day people working in the biscuit factory who want to do this in order to find out more what it was like based on our knowledge so far?
Yes. So they're doing it with a view of, yeah, let's find out about this person. Let's see what his legacy is and was, and whether we feel like we can continue it.
So it seems to me like if there's a shift, and clearly there is something quite different going on here, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say they're still in the same, they're in a double frame actually, aren't they? Which is quite interesting. They are themselves, as the biscuit workers, doing an exploration of being in this factory at that time. So it's not participant, because there's this double thing going on. We are looking at it, we are doing it for a reason, which is that reflective dimension all the time, self-spectator, that they can say, well, what we found out from doing that is this. So any thoughts on what distance that is, or frame distance that is? I'm just looking at it, and I'm just taking Dorothy's examples, and I'm thinking it's agent, because if we look at the idea of the agent, her example was a TV company making a documentary, and they have to interview this man, and they can do a reconstruction of the event, and they need it in detail. So they are going, I'd say it's agent, because they're doing a reconstruction of what it was like in those times. So we can learn from it, so that we can then communicate to others what it was like to be in the factory at that time. Does it help to think like that, to look at it like that and say, okay, this is what we're doing at this moment?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, so they're reconstructing it so that they can explain it and use that knowledge of it. Is that what you said? Sorry.
Yeah, if you think of the difference, because some of these ones, as you said, in the middle, they are subtle in their difference, yes. But if you think of guide, a guide has seen it. The guide has seen the event and has had an emotional reaction to the event. But in this chart, this thing that I published this on a booklet. She says the language here is that we build up a picture of how things were at the time they occurred. The event is all in the past. So reason prevails here, and there's tranquility, which may have feeling in it, but need not have. So we are the agents who must build up the picture.
And we're not authority, because we don't have any sort of legal power or
We're not making, we would be authority if we were doing this in order to make some change in the law. There were lots of accidents, and so there must be some kind of change in the law. Yeah. That would make us an authority. We need to examine this to see if the law must be changed. But here, no, we've got to just reconstruct the past for the purpose of serving the client or the ultimate objective.
And it wouldn't be critic, because we're not doing it for a wider societal need, are we, or purpose? We're doing it for a very particular purpose with the biscuit company. Would that be right or not? We're not representing anyone else or trying. Well,
a critic would be more about something like, okay, let's have a look at William Avery. Let's have a look at this portrait of William Avery. You could absolutely do this, couldn't you? Because this is a portrait of this man, and let's see what he's what he's got in this portrait, because it might tell us something about the man. And so we've got to interpret it. And that sort of changes our position a little bit again. You know, he might seem like, well, does he look very happy, for one thing? And what about the sort of the clothes that he's wearing? It seems like there are signs in there that tell us something about him. We're having to interpret it critically.
So we've got a letter. He's got a letter that he's going to be he's struggling over whether he should send a letter to his brother to say he wants to give up running the factory and he wants his brother to take over. So would we be looking frame distance critic at that then, if we looked at the letter? Do you think?
I think you absolutely could be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
So I think that frame distance can simply help to sort of focus clearly. Okay, this is what we really wanted to get them doing at this point. That's, I think, really what it's about. And it seems, I mean, you're doing it, but you're not sort of giving it that label, really.
No.
You're doing it. But I think you can see that, okay, oh, yeah, we have shifted it. And we've shifted not just the role, but we've shifted really exactly what precisely the task is asking of them.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah.
So really, it seems like what's coming up here is that it's not so much, it's maybe less, it's more a question of the task, what the task is doing in terms of the frame distance.
Yeah.
Do you want to look at another page of this plan?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Which one should we look at then?
Let's see. I just need to go on here. So I suppose further down, so if the last page, if you've got one that starts off with bar graph style census on the left, that's yeah. So I suppose what we think we're working towards is maybe the children in role as the biscuit company decide yes, they're interested in this factory, and creating some kind of memorial then which honors the legacy of William Avery. Yeah, but like a well-rounded view of him as a person.
So when you get to the last bit,
Yeah,
they are transforming it into art.
yeah,
They're transforming the information that they've got. And she did this, or planned to do it, with the Air Canada plane crash drama. She didn't actually get to it, but she planned to do it as they would create some kind of memorial. And it was a way really of them consolidating what they know to share with an outside audience. So they're creating this artwork. So clearly at that point, they are creating this memorial, they are creating an artwork, they are shifting into an artist for the purpose of consolidating their knowledge, their understanding will all kind of come together, because we've got to think, haven't we, exactly what kind of memorial this should be, how this will honor what we know of him as a person. So William Avery, it seems to me, is a central figure in this whole thing, isn't he?
yeah.
So you're finding ways of creating that. So what other tasks have we got here then? We've got annotating the census with accident reports. So it looks like recorder.
Yeah, I'm happy with that one. Yeah.
Does the annotated census change the view of William Avery? Does the logbook change the view of William Avery? Say something about him to his brother, wife, colleague, church committee. Do you want to just talk us through that?
Yeah, it's a possible task that might be coming up. So one class are looking, as I said, about from the point of view of the workers. So they're the ones that are creating the accident reports. And the other class, my class, are more looking at William Avery as being this I can't.
Quite reasonable person, isn't he?
Thank you, Yona. Yeah, very reasonable.
Sorry, I went off a minute ago because my battery ran out. So
okay.
So I hope I didn't miss nothing.
So they're going to, in the logbook of the factory, they're going to be recording. So they go to him and they say, my child doesn't have any shoes, and he will offer them money, or he'll say to go to the church and you can have a new coat, that kind of thing. There's this, he's a real life person. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. He was a real life person. And this is the kind of thing that he did. He organized concerts to raise money for people who were poor in the area, and he provided clothes and food for anyone who needed it. So not just people working in his factory. So we've got these sort of two viewpoints of him, as maybe someone who's not taking enough notice of his workers because these accidents are happening, but at the same time, he's putting a lot of his time and effort into trying to help people as best as he can. To say something about him to his brother, wife, colleague, church committee was just a first thought of how we might communicate that, really.
I think we also thought about maybe the health and safety laws at the time, you know, that you didn't have them in place. I don't think it was until 1860 something or whatever, you had proper laws in place to protect people at work, so that it was such a different culture that to try and see the man, not a man who was deliberately trying to, you know, cause harm to people, but who was constrained by his time and the finances, and, you know, how could he keep workers on if he had to spend a lot of money on other things they thought they were needed. And so, you know, I think that's what we were trying to think about, wasn't it, Lisa, as well?
Yeah.
But it wasn't like black and white, you know.
The people in the needle making industry who had the most dangerous job, they were called the pointers. Lots of them died before they were 30 because of the metal and dust that got into their lungs. And it's said that the manufacturers tried to help them, tried to put things in place on the machinery to try and stop this from happening, but that the workers demolished it, you know, sabotaged it, because they had a higher wage. They were paid more to do this dangerous job, and they didn't want their wages to go down. So yeah, there's this whole sort of story, isn't there, Yona, where we're trying to put this across about him.
They were all kind of victims of the culture of the time, really, weren't they, as well, in a sense? I think we try and get them to see the whole picture. So it's kind of not so much, it is changing the point of view, but it's giving another point of view of William Avery. And the classes are hopefully coming together to kind of grapple with this whole different views we have of what's happening. And from that, we hope maybe the whole cultural flavour of the time will be kind of something they begin to understand as well. I think that's part of the learning, isn't it, really?
But what's very interesting in connection with that, just a sort of societal thing, there's when we were looking at factory spaces, we were looking at a massive industrial space that's being developed called the Redditch Gateway, where there's Amazon there, and they want to introduce lots of factories, and to attract them on their website, they celebrate the fact that people in Redditch are paid less than the national average and paid less on average than the most of the West Midlands. So it's a bit frightening and scary that, you know, this idea of what's happened in the past is being repeated now as well.
It's interesting.
So is the heart of it is the curriculum area about 19th century factories, or is that just a part of it?
Yeah, it's about local history.
Yeah.
And this is a big part of Redditch, the Redditch history in the Victorian times up until about the 1950s. So these factories don't exist in Redditch now, but in the 1860s and around that time, Redditch was the heart of needle making in the world.
And fish hooks.
Yes.
There's this question of that seems, I think, coming through the work that Dorothy does all the time. It's responsibility, and it's a responsibility to tell this story, isn't it? That they've got to about this man, to understand this man and to tell his story, to honour him in terms of being honest about him, but honouring him as well as an individual. So he's at the centre of it as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
And one of the things that, because this is all, I'm just now really getting my head around frame distance myself. It's not that I know it, I'm getting my head around it now and looking at these sheets, and which I have put online, each sheet's like that with a outline of the different frames. So looking at one thing that she does on these sheets is every time she starts with the language here. Change the frame distance, you've changed the position, and the language changes. The way of knowing changes, but also the language changes. So if you're looking now at, okay, annotating the 1861 census with accident reports, recorders, there was this, you were saying the way they were talking about it, there was a certain way of talking that came out of that as the task. Because they were saying, well, it must have been like this, or this must have been here. It's the language of somebody who are people who are, so the recorders are, the language generated here is that of formal evidence, such as the Doomsday Book, where posterity demands a truthful picture in spoken, written, painted form. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create this truthful picture. And so that care and correct terminology and style can be demanded from that. And critic, the language generated here is that of the persons considering and interpreting the event so as to express opinions upon the matter. Okay. And if you're looking at, let's look at the census and the logbook, and what does it tell us about the man? That seems to me that is the critic, because the language is now, it's let's interpret it so as to be able to express an opinion about it. Seems absolutely that's what you're doing there. And the artist, where's the artist one gone? Okay, the artist, the language generated here is that of those who have some motivational response or some need to examine the events, such as the Good Samaritan, and to reshape it in another form. What about this next one, which is, we've just got time to look at this, maybe interview potential buyers of the factory today. What do they know of William's legacy? How will they honour it? Are they still doing that as people from the biscuit factory?
Yeah, and you talked about this one, didn't you? We were going to maybe shift them so that they would create some kind of application forms. So not as the biscuit making company this time. But they would be, more like the people who were in charge of selling the place. Was that right, Yona? Can you remember?
Yeah, I can't quite remember who they were going to be, but we did like this idea that they would perhaps create application forms. I can't remember who they were going to be. We'll have to think about that. But
yeah,
it was just to generate this idea of how will the application form demand from the people who fill them in a recognition of William Avery and his legacy and how we honour him. That had to seep through it somehow.
Yeah.
So we could find out if they bothered researching anything, if they bothered, knowing anything. So I think they were kind of a panel of people, weren't they? Who,
yes.
I mean, I don't know who they could be, but couldn't they be
almost like trustees of?
They could be trustees of it.
William
They related. If they could be the modern generation of William Avery's family, even, or I don't know, somebody who it matters to them really that to get this right. So it's got to be maybe some official trustee, body who makes sure that we tick the boxes, we get the right things, and that affects the language of obviously the forms and stuff, as David was saying about the language. I mean, I don't know. That's what we're thinking.
Yona, can you just say that lovely line again about task and learning from task that Dorothy said?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was something she said verbally, so I might not be spot on, but she said it's not what I want them to learn; it's the tasks I set them in order that they learn what I want them to learn.
It's not right. That's lovely. Yeah, I think it's really
I can text you, but it just seems, from what Lisa was doing, it just seemed that task the other day generated so much and engaged them so much. And the way they raised questions about the whole needlework factory today, the whole thing about the questions they had for a biscuit factory moving in there, and they were still asking questions of the past. It was a great generator of questions about it.
And what I suppose what that's evidence of again is doing stuff, front loading the work. So, and again, I'm going to quote you again from this morning or this afternoon. they're not kicking around their own ignorance.
No, they're not.
Around something
No.
of value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all there in front of them, and they're looking. What are these marks here? Are they the doorways? You know, they're just so curious about it. So obviously that doesn't just come from the task, but it comes from what you built up before about their curiosity as to the building. And obviously the fact that you've been doing Mantle for about, I God knows how many years, you know, the children are used to working in this way. It's so evident, really, you know. It was just incredible, I thought.
It's also just about responsibility, isn't it? We've got a responsibility to get this right, so we need to find out about it.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah.
Well, I think it's a case of, you know, I don't want this to be a case of filling in a form because you've got to fill in a form and that you've got to think, oh God, what's the frame distance now?
Yeah,
I mean, you've got to look at it and say, well, what is this about? And is it a useful tool and can we use it? And I think it is just about getting that precision in what you're doing. How are they positioned? What is the task demanding of them? And what is the language that they're going to need to use at this point? I think it's just that. I think it's that we can be using it maybe for that, to get that real focus and clarity and precision in what the task is doing and where they are in relation to it. And we can see here in what you're doing here that it's shifting at different points because you're taking a different approach to it. That's still in the same frame. The angle is different at each point. We're looking at it this way through the sensors, through the records. We're looking at it in a different way at different points.
I suppose as well, it's something to do with internal coherence, surely, because, you know, they're shifting, aren't they, from being people who are, you know, like researching or whatever they're doing in that first task, and then they're becoming people who are working in the factory, and then they become somebody who meets him and talks to him. It's got to be something to do with what makes sense to the children as well, and what's happening in that first task that makes that Lisa then knows the next task is this because of what she's been in, the children are giving her, plus the fact that you've got this whole frame of they need to honor this man, you know. So you've got these different levels, I think, when you're working in this way, haven't you, to assess which way do you go forward with your next task. Really, it's about that whole frame of, you know, the drama's about this, but also it's like, what are these kids telling us? You know, they're giving us so much that it gives you that. Obviously Lisa instinctively knows then what's the next, because she's a very instinctive teacher, and she'll go on to the next task that makes sense to them, you know. That's incredible, really. I love
if it was me, I'd be putting the buggers off moving from Newcastle and Plymouth to Redditch. Last thing they want to do.
Yeah.
That was really helpful though, David, thanks. I like the idea. In my head, I'm going to be thinking, frame distance means a change in language, and I think that will help me to get my head around it.
Yeah.
Say those pieces of paper that you're reading from online somewhere.
Look, I'll find it now and I'll sort of make sure you get a copy. Yes.
Brilliant. Yes, please.
There's a sheet on each of the frames. Yeah, and it gives examples as well. So I'll get that. I think I've put it on the website. I'll make sure that you get a copy anyway.
Brilliant.
Also, something you can do, David, is Google Lens. Like, you put something on Facebook, you put the frame Facebook post the other day, and if you take a picture with Google Lens, it turns it into text that you can then send to yourself in an email. A new little technical thing I discovered this week. So now you have it in a document from a photograph using that Google Lens. Yeah, there you go. For the Facebook posts.
So the next time some of us meet, it will be in Porto in a couple of weeks' time. I'm sorry, Helen, and I'm sorry about Charlie that you won't be there with us.
Oh.
Yeah. But come here, David, you've put a fantastic program together for Aberdeen.
Oh, I hope you'll be there for that.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, it's got Richard and Lisa doing stuff there, and Roberta and Iona.
And Lisa and Kieran, will you be talking about the project that the Needles project? Do you think you'll be talking about it in Aberdeen, about the Needles project?
I doubt it, because I don't understand a word of it.
sounds wonderful. I'd say, like, I'm just talking from the point of view of the teachers in my school, well, retired now, but they love that sort of stuff. Jeez, they love it.
Yeah. We haven't thought about it yet, but we could do.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. And
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you, David.
some of you in Porto. See everyone in a month's time for another seminar.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks,
very
Sue.
much.
Thanks,
See
bye,
you all in
everyone.
Porto.
Thank everyone.
Bye.
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 Thanks very much. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Bye.
Elaine.
Bye.
Sorry we didn't
Bye.
talk to you. Bye, Jose.
Bye. Bye-bye. Vale, adiós.